What is Trump's attitude on that really mean for Asia and then India?
I think India is dealing with its neighbors on its own terms. And we may have got one or two things wrong, but I think broadly speaking, India has been dealing with them with a great deal of maturity, great deal of sagacity, our neighbors.
So from a security perspective, I think the question that a lot of Asian allies are looking at the way that, and see, the alliance structure in Asia has always been different, right? It's a hub and spoke model. There is no overarching security organization like the NATO. So a lot depends on what the state of your bilateral relationship is. In fact, those allies are even more vulnerable than NATO, which they'll have trouble, but at least they have some forum for collective action. No such forum exists in the context of East Asia.
We're right now in the quarter century mark, 25 years into the 21st century. And here we are dealing with just, surprise after surprise. In 2020, it was COVID. In 2021, it was, 22 was the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which had its impact on the world. Perhaps not as much as COVID, but it certainly did in terms of energy prices, in terms of how the world saw the international global order. We then looked at the Israel-Gaza war and we thought things could not get any worse. And then we saw the re-election of Mr. Trump, which has had its own kind of disruptive impact on the world. When Mr. Trump, first came back to power, I can tell you as a journalist, we sort of heaved a sigh of relief because we thought we'll wake up every morning and our news agenda will be set for the day. But I can tell you 3 months into that, it was certainly 100 days into it, it had certainly begun to also become an area of fatigue because there was something new happening every day coming out of the US. Of course, now we are dealing with a new kind of crisis. And obviously, that's something that's going to be discussed in the next day or so much more. But we want to talk about Trump, what Trumperica, in a sense, Trump's America means for the world and for the global order. And I'd like to start by asking you gentlemen, Ambassador Tirumurti, as you know, was an ambassador in the was a diplomat in the US. And then he was India's permanent representative at the United Nations as well. Srinath Raghavan is an historian. He's looked very closely at the India-US archives in particular, but also was our official archivist on the Kargil War, and is a professor and now an author of a new book about Indira Gandhi, the Indira Gandhi's years and the transformation of India. To begin with, Ambassador Tirumurti, if I could start by just asking you, when you look at what Trump has done in 100 days, so we have a really good idea of where he's going, what do you think is his most disruptive influence really on the world?
Thank you very much, Suhasini. See, I think the so-called liberal world order, which came after World War II, there is no doubt that it is disintegrating. Now, over the last maybe 80 years, what had happened is that whenever someone challenged this world order, and you recall that China challenged it as a non-market economy, they challenged the world order. And what the Western countries and others did is they made China a member of the WTO. And they made China as a member of the WTO as a non-market economy. And now they are suffering because they realize that they have done the wrong thing. So Trump is very clearly doesn't want the WTO now because you have the biggest, second largest economy, which is a non-market economy. So what I'm saying is that, and apart from that, India is now the 5th largest economy. We have strong relations with countries, but we are still fighting for a place under the sun, whether it's the UN Security Council or others. So sometimes people tend to feel that, oh, the status quo is good for India. I think this is a Western narrative, frankly, because this is the narrative they throw at people who do very well in the liberal order in spite of all the difficulties you have. So this is what, so therefore, for example, anyway, so I think we should not be unduly nostalgic about the liberal world order. And we don't have another order coming and substituting it. Let me say that up front. Now the disintegration, why is it significant? It is significant because of a very simple thing. For the first time, the attack on the world order is coming from within. the United States, which was underwriting the liberal world order, is now the country which is actually breaking up the world order. I think that is why it is extremely significant. And this, let me also say, since we are talking about the United States, the disintegration of the world order did not start with the United States or start with Trump administration. That's the way I look at it. Because I think it started when China came into WTO as a non-market economy. Then we have had the emasculation of Russia, if I may use the word, emasculation of Russia by all the pressures coming through NATO, by come closer and closer to Russia, destroying the security architecture which has been carefully built over the years. And also countries like India, Brazil and others were also always knocking at the door of the New World Order. So President Trump, right from his first term, he has been extremely consistent. And he has talked about going closer to Russia. He has talked about telling the Europeans that you should take care of yourself. He has talked about his support for Israel, and he has also wanted to actually do a deal with China. So it's not that, whatever he's doing now should not come as a surprise to us at all, because all that he's doing now, he has already mentioned in his first term. Now, and let us also not forget, President Biden continued a lot of his policies. When it came to China, he is the one who actually went and tightened the relationship with Taiwan, and it was a bit of a red rag to China. So I think it was taken forward even by President Biden. So now when we come to the second term of President Trump, what's the difference? The difference is, number one, of course, he has a team which is maybe it's a bit inexperienced and probably blindly loyal to him, but definitely they're a very strong team he has. Secondly, that unexpectedly his rapprochement with Russia is obstructed by Ukraine war, and his proximity to Israel, which he has proclaimed before, is now tested by the Gaza war. So I think, so in this context, he's launched what is called this tariff war. Now, I don't want to dwell too much right now on it, but just to say that tariff war is very clearly, it has huge disruption has been caused, but it is all about reciprocity. And it is extremely transactional in nature. But the moment we talk about transactional, people tend to think, oh, he's about money, it's about transactional. Let me be very clear. Many things which Trump is doing is actually geopolitical. It is not just transactional. When he's resetting relations with Russia, it is geopolitical. There is nothing transnational about it. When he's resetting transatlantic alliance with Europe, it is not transactional, it is geopolitical. When he's resetting a discussion and a relationship with Iran, which he wants to do, it is geopolitical, it is not transactional. So I just wanted to say that let us not get carried away by this transactionalism. He's doing a lot of geopolitical things. And finally, if he is going to reset relations with China, it is going to be a geopolitical reset. He's not there right now, but he's aiming for it, and it will have a huge fallout on the whole relationship. So therefore, I think I'll stop here, and and maybe we can come to some of the specific subjects later.
Sure, absolutely. And I do want to also speak a little bit about the impact on India. But Professor Raghavan, I spoke to someone who was part of the Republican team pre the elections. And I said to him, but don't you worry about what Trump will do to the liberal world order? And he started laughing and he said, think about it. Trump doesn't care for liberals. He doesn't really care about the world. And he doesn't certainly care about order. So I thought that was a good way to, sort of project him. But as Ambassador Tirumurti says, there is a method to the madness. It would be a mistake to underestimate the kind of planning that has gone behind these first 100 days that we have already seen. Could I ask you where you think his most disruptive actions are going to be?
Well, so again, it's useful to just understand from a macro perspective what were the sort of key components of the old order, whichever way we want to characterize it, liberal or not. See, from the period of about 1942, even before the Second World War ended, the United States decided that it wanted to construct a certain kind of international order going forward. And the two principal components of it was, one was that the United States would underwrite the system of global capitalism. Secondly, they would be the main security provider alongside this, right? And a series of global institutions were created, IMF, World Bank, United Nations, etc., to underpin that at an international level. But the United States throughout, very consistently, from 1945 onwards, has said that it would privilege the upholding of the international capitalist order over the priorities of its own capital, right? Americans did very well, but they were willing to take asymmetric costs. You know, first the competitions came from countries like Germany and Japan. If you go back to the 1970s, there were all these calls. In fact, Trump is a product of that moment. If you look at his early speeches, it's all about Japan. The Japanese are ripping us off and so on, right? I mean, you did Plaza Accords, you did a bunch of things, you calibrated it. Then the Soviet Union collapsed, you got another wave of globalization, and the Americans have ridden it. So I think what Trump is trying to say, and I think this is the most disruptive thing, is to say that we will not underwrite that accord on those terms. It can no longer be an asymmetric acceptance of burdens on our part, right? And the United States did that willingly in the past because that was the way that their hegemonic strategy was. That we are willing to underwrite things, so that's why the rest of the world looks up to you. They follow you. He does not believe that that is the case. He believes that the United States has these trade deficits with countries which are all wrong, which need to be sorted out. Now, again, I agree with Ambassador Tirumurti that there is a method to the madness. But at the same time, I think it's important to realize that there are a number of pulls and pressures within his own team and the way, right? I mean, there are different people, even on simple things like economic agenda, who have very different sets of priorities, right? I mean, you have Scott Bessent, you have Peter Navarro. So the, the entire sort of attempt by some of his people to sort of rewrite the dollar-based international system, which is the so-called Mar-a-Lago paper, etc., which has been doing the rounds. Each of those actually represent a very different response to what has to be done. And how do you want to manage it? So I think there are significant contradictions, significant tensions still, which is part of the reason why you see that, some things are announced and then things are rolled back and then something else is done.
They're not calling it Liberation Day anymore, for example.
So all kinds of things are done. That's partly because I think, he has a core agenda. He thinks that the rest of the world should get even with the United States, right? We should stop running these trade deficits. But how do you do that? Right? I mean, most economists will tell you that that's a fool's errand to try and do it overnight. But then different parts of his team seem to have different ideas about how that's to be done. And I think the geopolitical kind of story of the things that are being done are a sort of a subset of this desire no longer to be doing asymmetric burden lifting on the part of the United States. Yep. NATO, yeah, you better pay up, right? I mean, again, it's not the first time. If you go all the way back to the 1970s, Richard Nixon was the first person who said that, allies need to do a lot more. Back in the day, it was about Asian allies, but also NATO and so on, right? So that kind of a trend has been there. But nobody is, at this point, of demanded that you have to have X percentage of GDP spending for defense, etc. The way that, Trump or J.D. Vance seem to lay down the law for X, Y, Z allies, right? I mean, so in a very real sense, I think the principal disruption actually will be with the international economic system. For the simple reason that I think that system is not one that has been constructed by any one particular player. Unlike diplomacy, economic actions require a range of actors to come into place. Global supply chains have been crafted by a number of disaggregated parties coming together. That's the way the market functions. You can have a diplomatic arrangement with Russia today, you can break it up tomorrow. I mean, it may have costs, but it's nothing as difficult as putting this Humpty Dumpty back together again, which I think is even now going to be very difficult.
I do want to come back to the Humpty Dumpty analogy because it's taking us a little while to understand that America as we knew it is actually changing. So it's not just about what the US does in the world, but what it does in India. But I do want to come back to the point you made about the building blocks of the world order. And you're right, it hasn't been in India's favor. But there were many parts of that world order that India held on to. For example, climate change. Where the Paris Accord was something that, in fact, the US bullied us into taking, or whether it was the idea of tariffs from the 1990s that allowed us to have some amount of equality and now has led to this huge amount of grievance on the part of the US. Or it was in just the idea of the rules-based system. After all our statements that I'm sure you've negotiated as well, all talk about the rules-based order, all talk about keeping, and especially in the Indo-Pacific, for example. Do you think that these 4 years, because as far as we know, Mr. Trump is around for another 4 years, will be seen in the long term as an aberration of America's retrenchment from that world order, or do you think it's now a trend that will continue?
No, I think, let me put it this way. You mentioned about climate change. Now, if you see what is happening in the context of climate change negotiations, actually it is crumbling.
Crumbling.
Yeah, there is no money in it. They do not now respect this division between developing countries and developed countries. The whole negotiations has been turned upside down. They want China and India to now bear the burden. They don't want to do it. And now they don't even have the money to do it. So the narration on climate change, where we depend on so many of the principles which was laid down, that's all gone. So, and even the so-called zero, what do you call it? Whatever. Now, even net zero. Now, even there, they are not, none of the developed countries are going to net zero by 2050. So I think that is crumbling. So if you actually look at it, there are many things which are crumbling. It's no more the type of, the rules-based order you're talking about, And even international law is crumbling. It has been violated left and right in the Gaza war. It has been violated in the Ukraine war. In fact, I don't think they're really bothered about international law anymore. So why I'm saying is that you're already having a disintegrating world order. And therefore, we should not cry. Because we, like nuclear, our nuclear and strategic space we got is in the midst of every type of obstacle which they put for us. And we still managed to do that. And if you are a proud nuclear power, it's in spite of everything the world did. So I think we have to be very clear that we are in this. And in this one apprehension which, I just wanted to mention, is that in the process of making America great again, President Trump should not make China great again. That is one thing we need to look at very, very carefully. Because when he is resetting the European world, the European transatlantic alliance, and you're saying that you spend on your money on your own, and that will be 2-3% of their GDP. And their welfare schemes will go off. They will no more be welfare states because they'll spend on defense. So whom are they going to look towards for markets? It's going to be China. And if you're going to reset their relationship with Asia, Asia is already, and they have already told Japan and South Korea that you should start looking at spending more on your defense. And what did South Korea and Japan, South Korea and Japan do? They went and revived after 5 years the first trilateral meeting with China, their trade ministers. So everyone in Asia has started hedging. So effectively what's happening is that you are giving a bigger space for China. And as it is with Russia, I'm not convinced that he's doing it to dislodge Russia from China. I think that so-called, no limits partnership will continue. So you have Russia, you have Asia, you have others who are hedging this. And so effectively, you're going to make China great again. So you have to be careful with this. So I just wanted to make this
Especially
point.
if he makes it look, by comparison, a more predictable power in a world of instability. Professor Raghavan, something that Ambassador Tirumurti was touching on is this idea that Trump has in his mind divided the world into spheres of influence. That it's not the US's problem anymore to deal with every fire that's going out. You look at Europe, and he basically told them that I can try and help with the peace process, but you know what, if you don't like the way I'm building peace, it's your problem, you deal with it. And things have moved over there. He seems to have left, even though he's critical of Israel, he seems to have left the Middle East to the Middle East players to deal with. Israel continues to carry out its bombing in Gaza. Saudi Arabia, UAE, the OIC get together. They have a counter plan now run by Egypt. So he's kind of leaving the Middle East to deal with the Middle East. Maybe he'll deal with Iran separately. When it comes to Asia, what is that going to mean for India? Because on the upside, it might mean less interference. We're seeing it right now in the escalation with Pakistan, that America is not coming to us with its normally, what External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar calls its preachy attitude. The US Vice President last night said that frankly, it's none of our business. I don't think I've ever heard a US official of that seniority say something like that. Yes, we'd like them to de-escalate, but it's really none of our business. On the other hand, it could mean that if there is a larger situation between China and India, that the US takes a similar view. So how do you see it, what does Trump's attitude on that really mean for Asia and then India?
Yeah, but even on the question of India, right? I mean, there have been so many conflicting signals, right? I mean, it's not been, the JD Vance line is one line. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has been saying consistently that we call for de-escalation. Then your vice president says something. The President Trump himself said that this is a 1,000-year-old problem. I mean, so you're at times just left baffling about what exactly this means. But frankly, as far as Asia is concerned, I think from a security perspective, I think there's an economic angle. I'll come to it in a minute. So from a security perspective, I think the question that a lot of Asian allies are looking at the way that this, and see, the alliance structure in Asia has always been different, right? It's a hub and spoke model. There is no overarching security organization like the NATO. So a lot depends on what the state of your bilateral relationship is. In fact, those allies are even more vulnerable than NATO, which they'll have trouble, but at least they have some forum for collective action. No such forum exists in the context of East Asia. So it's going to be a much bigger challenge, and each player, each hub of that, each spoke has to sort of now negotiate with the hub to make sure that they are on the right side. That then means that you have to do concessions on the economic front in order to be on the good side of things, right? Take the example of a country like Taiwan, whose future, I think, is perhaps something that a lot of Asian countries are watching. Because what does it mean for American commitment to Taiwan? President Trump has not made any very clear statements on whether he will pursue the older line on security sort of, arrangements with Taiwan, etc. But at the same time, Taiwan is under a lot of squeeze. I mean, just in the last 24 hours, the Taiwanese currency has taken a hit of the kind that they have not taken ever since the existence of the country. But that's because they cannot devalue. They've been told that you are sort of, you have to kind of revalue your currency. They cannot get rid of so many American assets because they also have trade surpluses, just as all Asian countries have.
And we have Mr. Rubio apparently saying Taiwanese independence is not necessarily our agenda.
So for Asian countries, I think the problem is dual. You have to deal with the United States of Donald Trump economically. And all Asian countries run surpluses. Please remember that. It's not just China. All Asian countries, in East Asia particularly, are running export surpluses vis-a-vis the United States. So they have to sort that out in order to get assurance that the security relationship can be somewhat predictable. So I think for Asia, actually, the problem is much more. It's just that we've not come around to it at some point.
We're just taking the hits as they come rather than dealing with the larger impact of them. Pastor Tirumurti, since you have dealt in the Ministry of External Affairs with the Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Myanmar beat when it was a thing, it's no longer one desk. I do want to ask you about, this idea that he seems to be propagating, that, in the region, India should just deal with its own sphere of influence. On the other hand, we've had several years of the Democrat government more or less meddling in Bangladesh, and the outcome of which we saw last year, having a very particular point of view with Pakistan, not really allowing us to have any kind of direct say there. And as well as, the US-China contestation, if you like, in South Asia. How do you see what Mr. Trump has said, particularly as, we saw it when he was sitting next to Prime Minister Modi, and he said, I'll leave Bangladesh to him. Now, we couldn't tell whether he was saying, I'll leave it to him to speak about, or I'll just leave it to him to deal with. But how do you see that?
No, I think it is absolutely welcome. This is an acknowledgement. Frankly, that doesn't mean they will still not be interested in it. I mean, we have to be a bit realistic. They have their assets. They have very strong links. And, they have people actually who are also beholden to the Americans in one way or the other. So, yes, but that is a welcome change. But that does not mean they'll be leave it entirely to us. But the fact also is an acknowledgement of a reality. I think India is dealing with its neighbors on its own terms. And we may have got one or two things wrong, but I think broadly speaking, India has been dealing with them with a great deal of maturity, great deal of sagacity, our neighbors. And we are not responsible for what the neighbors do to themselves. I mean, let us not do self-flagellation. So this is one thing I wanted to mention. But also, it has its own drawback. Because if you're going to leave countries for their spheres of influence, what is our sphere of influence? Our sphere of influence is not just our neighborhood. Our sphere of influence is Asia. We have a much bigger regional role, if not a global role. And that is how India should see for itself.
As well as the global south.
Yes, and we have been leaders of the global south. So we are not confined to our region at all. It's very incorrect if anyone would suggest that India should, confine itself. So therefore, when we are looking at the broader picture, then the question is that are they going to leave Asia to China? And that's exactly, it's very complex when it comes to Asia. And also our regional policies are extremely important in this context. And how do we approach the, West Asia? That's why, in fact, I've probably mentioned it in the earlier session, India should take a much bigger geopolitical role. And there is no conflict which should not be found missing.
Well, we can't do that. I do want to make the point that India is often called the abstentionist power, including when Ambassador Tirumurti was at the UN, where vote after vote, India would eventually just abstain. You'll abstain from an answer on that. But, I'm seeing that we do want to have a little time for the audience's questions. But Professor Raghavan, if I could ask you, a few days ago, I was in Bangalore speaking to students of MBA students, so fairly senior. And I was talking about the Trump impact on the economy, on India, and of course, some of the bullying that we're seeing over the free trade agreement negotiations. And I just for my own personal sort of curiosity asked, how many of you expect to either study or work in the United States in the future? And I think 2 or 3 people put their hands up. So I was a bit puzzled by that because it's not like anything I'd expected. So I asked them, 6 months ago, how many of you would have wanted to? Half the audience put their hand up. What we're seeing is not just a retrenchment of American power in the world. What we're seeing is a devaluing of America's soft power that, people don't feel as comfortable. Joseph Nye, unfortunately, just passed away, the father of the term soft power. But he said, eventually it's not who wins the war, it's whose story wins. Is America losing that story?
Yeah, and again, see, that story was a result of a conscious kind of set of decisions which were done. Again, if you go back a century ago exactly, right, 1924, 25, is the time that the United States introduces something called the New Immigration Act. It is actually called the Asian Immigration Act because the idea is to prevent Chinese and Indian immigrants from coming to the United States. Principally Chinese, but that was repealed in 1965. That led to a huge wave of migration, particularly from India. And many of us, middle-class Indians, have family, including close family, who are now Americans for all practical purposes. At least you and I do, I know that. And so that, I think, connection which was established, and the fact that the Indian American community in the United States has done so well for itself, it's typically 1% on everything, has given a sort of an unnoticed depth to the relationship. So by the time you come to, say, Mr. Narayanan negotiating the nuclear deal in the mid-2000s, you already have a level of societal connection which is unprecedented, historically unprecedented between these societies.
And even officials on both sides who are, of Indian origin.
So now, it's not just sort of making green card holders, H-1B visa has always been a bit of a problem because of the quota thing, but now I think, Trump is attacking American universities, which is the main attraction for most Indian students. That is the principal element of American soft power, is the attraction that you can go and study in those universities. We were doing this earlier conversation about liberal arts universities. They are the pioneers in that model. They have the best research universities in the world. Most, of those universities, particularly in terms of science and tech, a lot of students from India go there to do PhDs and other things, right? The draw of those institutions, if that comes down, and that is coming down very rapidly because of his policies, because he's at war with many of those universities, threatening to take away their tax status, cutting off federal funding, all of which means that graduate student population is going to dwindle in those. And that will have knock-on consequences. So I'm not surprised that students in India who would otherwise want to go to the United States to do an MBA, to study further, look for opportunities, now feel that perhaps those opportunities are drying up. And that, I think, is, in the long run, will do a huge amount of disservice to the US-India relationship itself.
Sure. Since you were posted in Washington in the early 2000s, there's this sense that Indians went to the US in waves. So there was that early 19th century, I think after Mr. Sound actually went to, we had to go to court to get the right for Indians to become citizens of the US. They weren't offered citizenship in the early 1900s. But then there was this idea, I believe in the 1950s and 60s, when America was fighting wars around the world, where they had a shortage of doctors. So we had a wave of Indian medical students and then doctors who now, of course, are in very, very prestigious places in the US. Then you have the 70s and then the 80s, where the software engineers and the hardware engineers and then the programmers all were welcomed to the US. There's a worry now that the next wave that Mr. Trump is doing is a wave out of America. In a sense, it's not just not just the white collar, the blue collar workers that he's sending back. He's saying by cutting away birthright citizenship, that your future, your families may not be able to settle here. Do you feel that, in a sense, India is going to face some of the brunt of these policies, simply because of our large population, our large workforce, our large skilled professionals looking for work?
No, absolutely. We are facing it because of the fact that, number one, I think Indian Americans' per capita income is probably the highest in the United States. And apart from...
most educated as
absolutely,
well.
and educated, and a whole lot of things going for us. So naturally, when there is a target, we become the first target. So it's going to be actually quite natural. But at the same time, I think we should look slightly beyond Trump in this, particularly in this aspect. That's what I feel. Because America needs us. I have no doubt about it. America needs us. America needs Indians. Americans will need not just our market, it needs our skills, our, So I think at some point of time, this equation will come about and they will realize this. So I don't see this, I see this as a very important short-term problem, because you have to manage perceptions in India that people are coming back, and there will always be a little bit of a setback. But I'm convinced that it's not going to go that distance. And even now, when you go to, let's say, a school function, what do you call it, as a county school function, all the schools of the county comes and they give prizes for science or mathematics. And you will have, 85% either Chinese or Indian kids. You are getting it, the rest of the 15% will be others. So, I mean, it's going to be a very changed America, let me put it this way. But the next generation, let me also say this, next generation is far more integrated into the United States than we think they are. They are actually Americans.
It's a different culture.
Yeah, they are very different culture, different views, different values. So I think we should not be too nostalgic about, that. They will do very well in the United States. And our only hope is that they will be our friends.
All right. Very quickly, I want to ask both of you, given this scenario that we've just built of where the US is, at least for the next 4 years, the foreseeable future, India has 3 choices. You either give in, just go with whatever America is doing, or you put up a fight. Or you just basically give up and you say, I'll stay out of this, keep Mr. Trump happy at some level, but not engage beyond a certain point. Do you think India has those choices, or we've already made a choice with Mr. Trump?
I mean, from what I can understand, and based on the statements which are made by senior ministers in the government, the foreign minister, the minister of commerce, etc., I think they definitely want to make this seem like it's an opportunity, that India should be agile, that we should be willing to see what kinds of openings that we get in order to do things. If some of that requires us to sort of bear some costs, we should perhaps be prepared. That may help us to sort of strengthen ourselves. I mean, that is the kind of line that we are hearing. And in fact, I was at a event last month where Dr. Jaishankar said that, that we are actually pretty gung-ho about the negotiations to come. Now, obviously those are talking points, but I still feel that the Indian approach is not one of saying that this is doomsday, that nothing is going to come out of it. I think we are. And again, that is partly the reflection of the kind of, nature of our economic relationship with the United States. It is not, in this case, perhaps fortunately for us, not the same as that of many East Asian countries, right? We even stand to benefit from some of the disruptions that he's doing. For instance, Apple has now said that most of the iPhones which are destined for the American market will now be manufactured in India, right? Again, now let's not overstate what all of that means, but it creates opportunity. It gives the government of India then to create a supply chain ecosystem around that, right?
And it has a ripple effect. Other companies
So there are some things opportunities that come our way, and I think the government wants to put a positive spin on it by saying that we want to focus on those opportunities and make the best of it. And I don't think that's a bad line, to be honest, because it is not very clear to me what's standing up to the United States at this point of time and saying that. I mean, is the United States going to force us to sort of, buy agricultural stuff on that? Frankly, even without tariffs and stuff, they'll still be priced out of the market. So I think we need to look at what are the baskets of issues that concern us, where we can get some degree of leverage. I mean, we have done an FTA with UK, which was, as you know, going on for years. But suddenly there is a moment, something has come through. So let's hope that we are able to sort of make something out of it.
Yeah. Ambassador, as a diplomat,
I just wanted to add one small thing. And I agree with entirely what he says. But, it is not just about, see, there are certain things we need to do internally to put our house together on the economy front. And for example, we ourselves wanted to enhance manufacturing, percentage of manufacturing to the GDP, and actually it came down a little bit and we have definitely very high tariffs. So I think in a way, it is also a good time for us to introspect whether our, the economic structure we have put together is actually helping our cause or not helping our cause. And that's where his point is very important, that if we have to be China +1 or whatever you call this, and supply chains have to start here, maybe this may be an opportunity for us internally. We don't have to be forced. We may as well do it ourselves.
Sure, use the crisis as an opportunity in a certain sense. But I do want to get your perspective as a diplomat, because how Trump does it, Trump-plomacy, if you like, is not what we are used to in India. Here is a man, we all know that Prime Minister Modi is a great public speaker, but he doesn't like to do press conferences. And yet Mr. Trump in one day had him come out twice and answer questions and fielded questions himself without any moderation. When he has a conversation with a leader, for example, he's quite as likely to tweet or put on Truth Social about it as he is to just deal directly with the leader only. We see, particularly when it comes to the free trade agreement, for example, the US really using what I would say is bullying tactics, where you have US officials come out publicly and say, this is not acceptable to us, putting India in the position that it either is my way or the highway. We had Mr. Trump saying India is willing to zero out all its tariffs. I don't know if that's the actual position, but if it is the actual position, then we'd rather hear it from our own leadership than from them. On agricultural market access, as you pointed out, Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, came out there and said, I went up to Mr. Modi and I said, Mr. Modi, why can't you buy, if you're such a big country with such a big economy, why can't you buy a bushel of corn? This is very sort of not familiar territory for our kind of diplomacy. How does one deal with that?
I think we try to reconcile both. And we have actually done a pretty good job of it. When Mr. Trump was actually talking about how India was the highest tariff in the world and all that type of thing, very quietly, our diplomats went and negotiated a very strong joint statement. So there is a lot of things which we do which goes under the radar. And it is hard work and a lot of good work which goes in. And that's why when Prime Minister Modi went there, he went in the background of Mr. Trump saying that, you're the highest tariff in the world and you have to do a hell of a lot and we can't accept it. But it was a very successful visit. We had a very good joint statement where there were some good points which could be taken forward. And so therefore, I think it is his style. I think the style is not just for international consumption. Sometimes we tend to mistake it that he's aimed at us. It is for his domestic constituency. He needs that for his, what do you call it, mega group or whatever you call it. So he needs that for them. So therefore, there is a lot of things which goes on which is for his constituency, because what we are talking is foreign policy. But he has got a very disruptive, so-called disruptive domestic policy as well.
Yes.
Which is very important. He's talking about bringing back manufacturing. He's talking about it's throwing out all the illegal immigrants. And DEI is
The
another
diversity,
issue.
yeah.
Exactly. So those are very important domestic things he's doing, which we are not talking about because it doesn't really affect us.
Until they put Indians in handcuffs and
yeah, which you
shackles
have been writing about, so that is where I think we should look at. Don't take out the rhetoric from whatever it is. But one thing I just wanted to emphasize very quickly, that his policies are policies in progress. Like Taiwan, you mentioned about Taiwan, the contradictory things which are coming. But what I gather from some of the writings from my colleagues particularly, is that the defense doctrine of the United States puts Taiwan right on top as a priority. So this is what we people have gathered, even though outside, we are not sure what his stand on Taiwan is. So I think there is a rhetoric aspect, but there is also a solid work which is going on to put the policy in place. So we should not be in that much of a hurry to judge him at this point of time.
All right, and do you think on this personal sort of front of the way the leaders deal with each other, or diplomats have to deal with it, that India should, in fact, take this kind of low position? Because that's not been India's style in a certain sense.
Yeah, it's not just about how he conducts himself in these situations, right? It's also the kinds of people, like, Wittkopf, who's this sort of special envoy, doing all these very complex negotiations in the Middle East, Ukraine. He's clearly a good negotiator, but his main area of expertise is real estate negotiations. But Mr. Trump believes that he can do the deal that he wants. So there is there is a certain kind of a style which is not just personal, but which he has given other people enough, sort of plenipotentiary powers to.
If eventually he fails, it'll be in front of the whole world.
Exactly.
So in a sense, he's taking that risk. Let me just see with a show of hands how many questions there are, and then I'll try to go around to everybody. There's a gentleman in the back, and then I'll come to Mr. Ram in the front.
My name is Navratan. I incubate deep tech startups.
Just speak into the mic, please, because...
My name is Navratan. I incubate deep tech startups. Do you think talent pool, which is now getting sort of disengaged from the American side, is a gain to India and maybe gain to the rest of the world, the European Union?
Which is a gain to India?
Reverse drain, brain drain.
We're not, maybe you just need to speak into the mic.
People not going to US anymore is a
Can
gain
India
to
use
India.
its demographic dividend if the idea that the best of India were leaving for the US, is that correct? That can we use them now? Is that actually a possible brain gain for India?
We are already using them. So there is no question. I still remember we had this India caucus. Please sit down. India caucus in the House of Republicans. Then we wanted to start in the Senate. We wanted to start an India caucus. And it was really during my time when I was there. It's not as if I had a hand in it, but I was a member of the mission there. We started a Senate caucus on India. And 33 out of the 100 senators joined right at the beginning. And there were a lot of Republicans and Democrats. The House caucus was mainly Democrats at that time, naturally, because at the time we were very close to the Democrats. I'm talking about Clinton and before. But so therefore, why I'm saying is that our Indian Americans have started not only playing an important part as Indian Americans, as Americans, but they are also in many ways playing this bridging role between India and the United States. And this is happening. It's happening all the time. So, right now, there is brain gain. There is no brain drain.
All right. Mr. Ram? Could we get a mic up front, please?
As for decoding Trump, and let's look at the play with China. The China we see, I was in China last week and had some interesting conversations. The China we see today is very different from the China that they saw in Trump's first term. And this leader, President Xi, is not going to give in. I think his predecessors were much weaker, maybe in some ways more likable for some. But it is clear that they are not overly worried. They are concerned. But it was pointed out to me that China's trade with the United States, two-way trade, is only about 13 to 14% of China's global two-way trade. So it will hurt, but it is not an existential threat. And they say they have no choice here. They have to stand up. And as for Trump, I think I would bet that he would do a deal at some point, not too far away. My understanding is Trump, I think it's economics that primarily moves Trumpism as a deal maker. There's some literature on this, including a book called The Greatest Show on Earth, written by my classmate at Columbia, Wayne Barrett. He's a fine investigative reporter, and there's a lot. So Trump, in this perception at least, is primarily a deal maker. Of course, geopolitics is involved, but I think it's secondary to what he wants economically. This is arguable. As for India, I think China is India's either its top or one of the top two trading partners, two-way trade, with two-way trade amounting to something between 138 to 140 billion US dollars. And so I think whether India can benefit hugely in a comparative sense from China is debatable in this sense. And I think one way is the Chinese, I don't think, want confrontation, but they have no choice. But I sort of disagree with the general trend here that the way to go forward is, contrasting with what Mr. Narayanan said in another context, that we have to do our own thing. We are not quite doing our own thing, whether it is on Gaza or other things. I think,
or even on trade. It's a fair point. Thank you.
So I think, I would sort of disagree with the assurance with which you sort of confirmed India's present every statement they made. We've got to stand up more. I'd like your comment on that.
For some of these things. Would you like to take it, both?
Yeah, so, I think it's fair to say, you're absolutely right, sir, that the US-China trade is only a small part of China's exports. But the issue is not just of US-China trade. When you have tariffs of this level, the Chinese now have an incentive to start exporting to other markets. And those other markets are all already concerned about the presence of Chinese imports, right? So they are going to sort of impose tariffs. That's what the Chinese understand, which is why Xi Jinping has been doing these rounds. So it is not a very easy situation for them to manage. But I entirely agree with you that they are determined that they're going to manage it. But there are aspects of it that they also have to be careful. They still have $1 trillion in American sort of, treasury bonds and other kinds of assets. And the Chinese central bank has decided that they cannot kind of get rid of all of those things in short order. It's just not possible. It's got to be a slow transition. So there are aspects of the system into which they are locked. It's not very easy for them.
Right. And on the question of whether India should be standing up more?
No, I think he's talking about politically standing up to the United States, right? See, my sense is that in US-India economic relations are quite different from US-China or US other East Asian countries' economic relations. We are not a manufacturing exporting country with various kinds of surpluses that we run as far as the United States is concerned. The United States is much more concerned about our economy opening up to them by way of tariffs and other kinds of things. So we do have different kinds of problems. So it's not very clear to me what standing up at this point of time effectively means,
which is what
right? Because market access to the United States is pretty important for Indian companies. So especially for IT export services and other things.
We are in Bangalore. Ambassador Tirumurti, do you think there's a cost-benefit analysis here in terms of standing up to the Trump administration?
Actually, this brings me, I'm so sorry to come back to the same point again. India needs to play a bigger geopolitical role.
Have its own.
And it's not just about India vis-a-vis Trump or India vis-a-vis China. just as we need a reset of our relations with China. What we have done is just managed it, or we barely managed it. But we need a reset of our relations with China. We need a reset of our relations with the United States, which we can use this BTA or whatever coming up. But you're also being confronted with a reset of our relation with Europe and with Asia in many ways. We are not even discussing Africa, which is a bit unfortunate. But anyway, the point is that this is why I feel that a regional policy should be stronger. You know, when we look at Central Asia, we did not go to the summit of the SCO. But we have very strong bilateral relations with each of them, but we didn't go to the regional setup. We did not join RCEP for reasons which I'm sure are absolutely correct. But we are still nowhere there in ASEAN and the East Asian region. So we need to now, well, with Europe, we are negotiating this for God knows how many decades, this free trade agreement. And and I know the fault is with the Europeans. I'm not suggesting that India is...
And I could sort of add, when it comes to this idea of Trump himself, we have a case where with the Biden administration, they asked us to drop our Russian imports. We actually increased them. With the Trump administration in the last round, he asked us to drop our oil imports from Iran, and we dropped them. So
I think it's important to have a regional policy, because we have excellent bilateral relations. But do we have regional relations, or are we involved in it? That's why I wanted to mention to you when I say geopolitical role. I'm not suggesting we should go and mediate in Ukraine or mediate in Gaza or something. But we need to have a more active geopolitical role. That will necessarily obviate the whole issue of, whether we should be pushing forward, going back. No, you will be taken for what you are.
Okay. I think we have to wrap up. There was one lady in the back I wanted to take a question from. There, right there.
Hello.
Thank you very much. You hear me? Yeah. Thank you very much for the interesting insights. Actually, this conversation brings to mind many questions.
Just one will do, because I can see.
Yes, I will do one. In the context of the countries who stand up to Mr. Trump will perhaps gain, and related to we need to take a larger geopolitical role. We have seen in recent elections the world over, the countries who have, the leaders who have stood up to Trump have come back to power. And if you say a larger geopolitical role, does that translate into perhaps less abstentions at the UNSC votes?
Good point. I'll start with Professor Raghavan. You look at Australia, you look at Canada, even Singapore, where the Prime Minister was pretty tough about the tariffs, and all of them have been given resounding mandates.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't sort of put it all down to Trump. I mean, I think obviously, Canada has a certain kind of a problem at hand, and the Liberal government was able to, Mark Carney was able to kind of ride that wave. I don't think it's a question of the government's standing up to Trump, which is kind of getting there. It is just that the people believe that they have a certain kind of a relationship with the United States, if you're Canadian, and that the United States cannot push you around in quite these ways, or they just demand. But trust me, the Canadian Prime Minister will be on the negotiating table with NAFTA as a very
He's already visited.
So it has to happen. So, so we can do political grandstanding to a certain degree. I just believe that it's not very clear to me on the economic, technological dimensions of our relationship with the United States that there is that much to be gained by grandstanding. This does not mean that I say that we should not take important stances on diplomatic issues, and I'll leave it to Ambassador Tirumurti to talk about abstentions, because abstention also means it's a choice, incidentally. It does not mean that you're not making any statement.
No decision is also a decision. Yeah. Ambassador?
Non-alignment was about abstention. Let it be very clear. You had the Cold War, and Prime Minister Nehru said that we don't want to join either of you. We have a third path. And at that time, India was not just protecting our strategic autonomy, it was telling the world, and many developing countries joined us, and we became the non-aligned movement. If you can call it abstention, you can call it engagement. So abstention carries with it the seeds of engagement. It is a stand you're taking, and it's a stand which we took, which we were leading the world in that. So now the world has changed, as he was mentioning, that you have so much of stake of China in the United States, and the United States in China, that we are following a policy of multi-alignment, because that is the natural thing. So therefore, and another thing, when I talk about engagement, I don't mean mediation. You know, in the Korean War, sorry, I'll just take one more minute. In the Korean War in the 50s, India was barely 3-4 years as an independent country. But we were in the Security Council. We played a very important role in the Korean War. We were not mediators, but we played an important role. And to the extent that when armistice and others came about, India was made the chair of the Neutral Nations Repatriation Committee, which had 5 members, and India was the chair, 2 on the west and 2 on the east, whatever you call it. So, but we were not mediating. We just played a very important geopolitical role. And that is the role I'm trying to say India should take up. We need not mediate, or we don't have to get into it. So play a bigger geopolitical role, let the world know. We have everything going for us. What are we diffident about? And I think, as I said in the morning, playing an important geopolitical role and becoming bigger as an economy are 2 sides of the same coin.
All right. On that note, I know this conversation can continue for a while, but I'd like to thank our guests, Ambassador Tirumurti, Professor Raghavan, for a very interesting discussion.